March Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee meeting for the Kentucky United We Learn Council. I'm excited to see you all and looking forward to the work that we're sharing this afternoon. So our first order of business on our agenda is for Kathy to talk to us about confirmation of our charter. So Kathy, I'm gonna turn that over to you. Well, Kathy was here a minute ago.
And Kathy was so excited because she got on without any trouble today.
And I was in the wrong meeting, so, and I joined and it's kicked her off.
Oh,
Well,
then maybe you could do it, huh?
yeah, well, I can just share with you. I can take this for Kathy. Thanks to each and every one of the members who participated in the back and forth on the charter. It was really helpful. It was a collaborative effort to design the charter, and especially thanks to those who voted for the charter. And we just wanted to share that it was unanimous, it was approved. So our charter document is finalized at this point. And what we will do is in the future, maybe every 6 months or annually, we'll review that charter to see if there's any adjustments that need to be made, so that as we move along in the process of working together, that we can continue to tweak it if needed for our working relationships and the policies that we are following. So again, thanks to everybody who gave input, who voted on the charter, because it was of importance, and we appreciate that. So I'll kick it back to you then, Sarah.
You might want to quickly mention, Jennifer, that so for the charter and the FAQs for the charter, or for how the committee works, which is related but not quite the same, they're both in the folder called Charter and FAQs that you all have access to. So you can download that at any time.
Yes. I appreciate everybody that gave feedback on that. Like Jennifer said, we had a lot of good questions and added a lot of updates to that based on some of your feedback. And there's Kathy pop it in. Awesome. So Kathy, I don't know if you're fully up and running because you look a little frozen there. Do you want to go ahead and
I've gotten kicked out?
Yeah, that's what we figured. Sorry. It's been an afternoon of wrong links and technology not wanting to cooperate. So Jennifer went ahead and shared about the confirmation of the committee charter, since we weren't sure what had happened when you got booted from the Zoom meeting, but we're ready to get started on sharing across work streams. So if you want to go ahead with sharing about Learning Inside Kentucky, that would be great.
All right. Hello, everyone. One of the things that we had established is we wanted to give everyone time to make sure that they had an opportunity to share as much as they could. So I will be somewhat of a timekeeper to make sure that we get to everyone that would like to share. And I hadn't selected who was going first, and just wondering if our team wanted to volunteer in terms of Inside Kentucky. I didn't know if Betty and Ernie wanted to go first, or if we had Shirley or Azure D. I think Azure D is not here, so I'll give an update on hers after you guys have. Would you guys mind going first? Betty and Ernie, just giving us an update on who you are. And you're muted, so we'll need you to hear. There you go. Got one.
Got one. Ernie, you need to unmute. I guess I'm proud of myself because this is the first time in a long time that I've unmuted before I started talking. So I don't usually do this well. Ernie and I have been working and trying to grasp the greater understanding of CARA and CARA's both assessment and accountability. And Ernie, I'm going to let you give the initial description of where we were, where we started, and then I'll talk about what we're going to do next.
Okay, so kind of talk about the document I created and our summary, and then you'll go, okay, and you'll talk about next steps. Okay, as you all know, at the last meeting, we presented a thorough review of, you know, where we've been since with the initiation of CARA and the assessments and the different models, starting from 1990 to current. We didn't have the last couple of years detailed at our last meeting, but we do now, being that the last assessment and the documentation of that. So kind of where we are is we've been assessing, you know, the different elements based on the information we can gather. And you know, what we've learned about the CARA since, you know, it was instituted in 1990 was that there were several things that CARA was hoping to accomplish, of which one was standard funding protocols for all Kentucky schools. They wanted to remove and prevent political influence. They wanted to, you know, institute performance expectations for all students, make educators accountable, and utilize an accountability model for measuring expectations, all of which occurred. You know, CARA did succeed in initializing all of these beginning steps. However, what we learned was that even though these items were met, you know, they didn't develop a system that could, you know, stand the test of time. So, so as a result, you know, we've concluded, you know, of course, and as you all know, then we need to develop a system that stands the test of time, which will work, function, and endure for years to come. The system, you know, needs to be able to adapt, adopt, and then change to endure. CARA did not appear to have this type of futuristic dimensions that we could identify. We need to ensure that all new models and additional assessments are complete prior to implementation, and that the monitoring assessment is also complete prior to implementation. This was a huge flaw for CARA, because when that model was created, it started based on outside influences, of course, when it probably wasn't ready to start. You know, the complete model wasn't complete, the monitoring wasn't complete, you know, but they had deadlines to meet, and they did that. We don't have any information currently what is still working, what didn't work, or what could work if adapted as far as, you know, a system in itself. We have some more questions about who and how will the other piloted systems in Kentucky be viewed, you know, because, you know, and analyzed and shared with the community, kind of how that's going to work other than CARA. Some of the sustainability considerations we hope the group will do and initiate is we still need to review, you know, the past models, you know, the CARA system and all the other models that have occurred since 1990 to present, or if nothing else, compare CARA to the current system and, you know, identify if anything in the current system occurred also during CARA, and see what elements actually stood the test of time. We don't have that, you know, that depth detail information available at this time, but if we can get that, it would be really great to assess that information, because so we can look at to see what performance-based pieces still exist, if any, or if there are none. That's just something we've not been able to review currently. It's really important for us to still see what the accountability system looked like for CARA. We've not seen that yet. We've kind of just, you know, been given, you know, the history and the pieces like that's all we've been able to find so far. One of the things that we did identify is that, you know, as all the different information that, you know, that we have, you know, identifies the current systems that are being measured, but they also identify additional assessments that are being utilized throughout the course of that year on top of the original system, such as the ACT. Now, the ACT is one assessment that's, you know, the kind of on top of the rest of it that has stood the test of time. It's been ongoing since 2007, and it would be really interesting to see how it succeeded. I mean, I know it's outside of probably the model issue, but it really would be interesting to see because it's still ongoing, and I know it's been adapted and changed and modified, and it has a valuable purpose. We also believe some of the other things that needs to be considered, you know, during for sustainability is design a system that has dimensions for continued evaluation and for studying. So, you know, to be able to stand the test of times, you need a tracking system that specifically monitors what you changed as you go through it. Be able to develop a tracking system that changes those things. Other things we learned about Kira was, there's other elements outside of just the education component. There is the funding allocation component, such as the SEEK, which was Support Education Excellence in Kentucky. The model that standardized how the schools was funded. So we really need to look at all the different elements as we're developing our monitoring system to determine any inside influences and outside influences, such as, the funding allocation component of whatever model is designed and how that could impact its continuation. We need to determine if there are other elements that exist that impacts the current system or future system and assess, inside and outside other influences. There may be other components of CARA like SEEK that we haven't seen yet, but we want to make sure, we do get all components of it. I have a lot of more details as far as notes and things like that, but I'm going to hand this off to Betty so she can talk about next steps and some of the questions that we have for committee members.
So last meeting, we gave you more detail on what CARA was about, the components of it, and what it entailed. And as we've done more research, and Kathy's been doing research and finding articles and information, we're finding more. It was also, I thought it was interesting to note that the Pritchard Committee last year had an article on CARA 30 years later, what happened and where are we now. So I thought that was interesting for us to go. But what we have decided to do, in addition to doing reviews of resources, and we're going to continue to do that, we still have more of that to do to nail this down. But we're also going to do some interviews. So next Tuesday, we're going to be interviewing Stuart Call. Stuart was the founder and CEO of what was then called Advanced Systems Change to Measure Progress. That was our contractor. And we thought he'd be able to give us an interesting perspective from the other side on what CARA's assessment, accountability, and what that meant. Then we're also going to interview Rhonda and Kevin within the department to get the other perspective of what happened. We moved away from what that looked like. What do we do with that? What were components that perhaps we wish we still had, components that should be there. So we're moving into looking at the difference of what CARA was, well, we know why it was created. We know what happened. We also know there was a definite drift away that's had an impact on student achievement now. That student achievement is not what it was then. But we thought the interviews were going to give us interesting information. We're going to meet next, so we're interviewing Stuart next Tuesday. We're going to be back in Frankfurt meeting on Wednesday, pulling together some other resources and reviews that we do between now and then the interviews that we do next Tuesday and Wednesday, and pulling that together to gather more information of where we're going to go. One thing that we thought would be important to know is there's a lot we can write about this. There's a lot already known. We can give you all that we have. But because the committee will be charged with making recommendations, we thought we would like to know from you all, what specifically would you like to hear about CARA? What learnings, what information, there are structures that you want. And if you can't think of that right now, you can send it to us between now and next week. Because we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. And with CARA, it's a little bit different from some of the other external assessment programs because it is so connected to politics in Kentucky. And quite honestly, the next version will also be connected to politics in Kentucky. So that makes it a little different. And so I wanted to hear from you. Is there something specific that you think will help you as the committee makes the decisions that you want us to nail down now while we have access to people and resources? So
Betty and Ernie, thank you so much. You guys you brought a lot of information to us, and we really appreciate the time that you've taken because it is a lot to learn. and a lot to know about. I've been trying to study it myself as well. One of the things I failed to mention is that what we're going to do is make presentations and then ask questions. And also you can use the chat room at any time if you have a question. I'm one of those that I lose my thoughts a lot, so I put them in the chat room. So as we're going through the presentations, if you have a burning question, we'd like for you to put it in the chat room and we'll go back and look at it and discuss it then. So we want to make sure that everyone has time to make their presentations. Does that work for everyone? I'm still getting used to not hearing people respond. Yes, so I'm just assuming everyone is saying
putting
that.
it in the
that
chat
will
is
work.
really helpful. So like Susan has a question in there already, so that's helpful and doesn't take any time away from other presentations.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. So next, I think what we'll do is, Andre, do you want to go next or do you want me to go next?
I'll leave that up to you, either way.
I'll let you go.
Okay, so then I will share with you all what I've been doing. And actually, I'm going to
Andre, I think you're frozen.
Really? No, I
Oh,
think
I'm frozen. Maybe I'm frozen.
you might be frozen. Yes. Okay, I'm going to quickly share my screen. Let me just make sure I have the right folder up here. Yeah, this is good. All right. So I want my email. There we go. So if you go into our folder for the Cool Council members and then the Acceleration Innovation Committee, there's that folder on the AISC report. And that has a few use case reviews in it that we're going to talk about in a second. A folder for design principles. We're also going to talk about this. And then I'm going to talk now about KDE initiatives. So what I had offered to do was essentially to reach out to the different leaders of these initiatives and ask them some specific questions about the structure of their work moving forward. So if you want to understand the kind of questions we have asked, there's this document here called the strategic questions about these initiatives. And if you look at that, you'll see that there are these 4 blocks of questions. So we wanted to know things like, what's the major mission of your initiative? What milestones are you working toward? What deliverables are you going to produce this year? And what resources represent what you're about? Like, do you have any links to share? But we also wanted to ask some technical questions. So connections between your initiatives and other work streams, how they're thinking about assessment and accountability questions, because that's really the charge of our committee to a large degree. And are they thinking at all about bringing into alignment what might be going on across relatively diverse either district clusters or regional cooperatives that they're responsible for, and all of that. Then a block around engagement. So are you building capacity in any way? Because that might be opportunities for us to understand how they're framing these issues and how we can maybe integrate with them. Do you have some resources that you can share for that? What is some work that you may not have the capacity to take on? So maybe we or some other organization can help. And are there any entry points that would allow us to engage with you? And then finally, some coordination questions, because, not every initiative thinks about the Cool Council and our committees at the moment. So there were questions like, so how can we best connect with you? And what would you like to know from us in order to inform your work? What information would you like to have from us to make sure that you can do your work well? And how can we stay abreast about what's going on? So those were the questions that we've asked them, and I'm sharing them here. Take the time for that, because I think many of these are not just relevant for these initiatives. Those are the kinds of questions we want to be getting answers toward in order to build up our mental model. We were in fact just at a leadership meeting today where several KDE members were saying that there are additional efforts now also in-house going on in order to find representations and language and ways of showing the interconnectedness between all of these different initiatives. Because as it often is, initiatives get funded, they get kick-started, and then you have sort of these incidental connections where you may have a district that is deeply engaged with one initiative, also does a little bit of work in another initiative, and then also has some members that sit on the Cool Council, for example. And so you have these very complex relationships, and we're trying to make, or the department's trying to make that visible, and we are trying to help as we can. So with that in mind, I have reached out to contacts for these different initiatives, and they have filled out at least an initial version of these documents. So with some of them, I was able to do a little bit of an iteration and ask some follow-up questions. With other people, that's still ongoing. So when you open these up, you can sort of see that there might be some places where there's TBDs and things like that. So there's too much information here to go through all of that, but I think there's some, hopefully some useful resources in here that help you understand, for example, what's going on. We may have mentioned last time that, for example, you get a sense of the fact that the innovative teacher cohort, for example, involves 11 teachers, that there's presentations coming up in the summer, and that some of these are also engaged in PBL, project-based learning work. You get information like, the deeper learning initiatives that they're essentially implemented across all the districts almost in the state. They're managed through the regional cooperatives, but there's diversity in the plans, and there's these questions about how to bring alignment into this is not quite yet fully sort of contextualized and worked on. So I think there's opportunities there where we as a committee can actually help with that process, and where we actually need to establish additional connections. And you can also get some useful links sometimes. So for example, I found that when you click on this document, this is the deeper learning document, and I'm going to scroll to the end. So there's this website here, which some of you may know was new to me in that moment. So within the Kentucky Association of Educational Cooperatives, for example, there's this website here that talks about, or that gives you an entry point into deeper learning work. And then there's a subsite that is about the portrait of a learner or a graduate. This is the official quote unquote portrait that was approved by the Department of Education. And then you get like the different local, or different, not all of them, but you get certain local portraits of a graduate. So that just like that as a resource, which is already well organized, can be really helpful. So I encourage you all to at least pick the pieces that may be relevant that you want to learn about. It's a starting point for this. And one other thing that I've done is I started putting together very simply some links also from the websites, because websites aren't PDFs that you can easily save. So I thought I'll make like one single running document where you can look at these KDE websites. So for example, KDE has a website dedicated to the United We Learn effort, and also an overview landing page for the current projects and initiatives. And then there's other dedicated pages. For example, there's a page for the Innovative Learning Network, a list of all the educational cooperatives. Then there's some dedicated subspaces related to some initiatives. I just showed you one for deeper learning, but there's also the L3 workspace. There's a space on personalized learning. There's a lot of information and frameworks there. On there's glossaries floating around that have really wonderful descriptions of key terms that are really helpful. So where, if we want to organize our information, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then I also put here the link to the current landing page for the current accountability system, because that's also good as a reference point. And so, finally, in this folder, you can also find the United We Learn report and the United We Learn flyer, because the work, as we actually discussed today in one of our leadership meetings, really is in service of the vision laid out through those efforts that many of you helped shape. So I put that here as sort of almost like a reminder of the context for this work. One thing that you can do either now in the chat, in the conversation if we have time, or certainly afterwards, and you can do that by, for example, contacting me or contacting Kathy and Sarah. I'm very happy if you just contact me. I can sort of do some of that legwork and coordination. Is if there are things that you would like to know about these initiatives that is currently not being captured in these documents, please share that with us, because it also, gives us some almost like mandate to reach out to the people and nudge them a little bit. Yes, you can imagine most people are very busy, but they try to help. And there's always opportunities to go deeper. So the question is, how much time do we take from ask of them, and where do we go deeper? So the more you can sort of provide clarity and prioritize and help us strategize around certain issues beyond what we would naturally do, obviously we try to do that as well, the easier it is for us. And when I say this, I think I hadn't thought about this, but I'm going to put a document here that I'm going to create after. I'll be quiet in just a second. And in that document, I'll make like a landing page where you can add the questions that you may have for the different initiatives, so that if you have a question, that might actually be the easiest place. You can just go to this folder that you all have access to and then put your questions in there. Then we don't have to have like 10 emails floating around. And it's not through me necessarily, it's more public. And we can work from there.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
let me
Andre.
stop there. Kathy, how's that?
That was great. Thank you very much. Just to learn more about the L3s and the deeper learning and the project-based learning. Again, just a reminder, that's what Andre was reporting on. Our committee members that were supposed to make that presentation were not available. And so he stepped in to make it. Thank you very much. We appreciate that, and a lot more to learn. Again, reminder, please put your questions in the chat. I'm looking at questions that several of you already have, especially for Kara. And so we can all be thinking about those as we move forward. Now, the next one I am going to report on as well, because Azra D. Garland, she could not be present today. And I told her that I thought she had such an excellent report that I would make sure that we got some information from her. I'll do my best in explaining everything that she has done. One of the things that we were looking at was the non-traditional student. And when we say non-traditional, in the sense that they may not be attending the public schools. And so that was one of the things that we thought about that's going to be really important to being innovative, is what are we doing for those students? And so these are students that are not necessarily attending K through 12 public schools in a school district or in a single school district. And then there are also those students that may be attending this school, but there are issues that arise that causes complications for them attending school. So an example is students that are attending alternative schools, the residential facilities, the homeless, which are unhoused, or then the homeschool, the juvenile justice, and those that are in long-term hospital care. And the migrants who leave the state. Once they started in the school, they may leave the state for one reason or another. And then the online e-learner, thinking about how are all these students, how are we, when we get ready to develop our plans, how do we incorporate them to make sure that the accountability and assessment system is a strong system available to them. And even I hadn't even thought about this one. And one of the things that she put in her notes was children that are in orphanages and private religious schools, which also have some reporting that goes to the state as far as any services that those students may be receiving. And then the school for the blind. So, and what she did was she defined what some of the strengths were. And some of the strengths that she felt, students are in smaller classes with fewer students in some cases, not in all cases, but especially in the juvenile justice, they tend to have smaller classroom sizes. And then, she couldn't speak to all the different non-traditional scenarios that we came up with. And there are some that do have smaller class sizes, and some of them are large or just additional classes. The biggest weakness was consistency. Some students frequently move between districts, resulting in a lost educational days, as well as additional time for acclimation and inconsistency in the courses that they're taking. And actually, I could attest to this. When I moved to Louisville, my children were in school, and some of the coursework they had taken was great. But when I bought my house and moved to another area, my daughter was behind. She hadn't learned Kentucky history at her school. She was scheduled to learn it the year that I moved. So I understood what she was talking about when she talks about inconsistency in courses. Her recommendations were an online cloud-based system with open access for all educators and class managers, case managers, as well as counselors, state agency administrators and staff, and nonprofit parents and students. And what she's saying in this is that we need to be able to provide access to all of these people, because these are people that are working with our students on a regular basis. So whether it's a case manager, a counselor, some state agency, even nonprofit agencies that may be working with them, as well as the parents and the students. The students should, the system should include school credits, project samples, and assessment results, and developmental marker achievements. So this was just one of several recommendations that she said, that she provided. And currently, teachers and parents have access to Infinite Campus for school records. Other agencies like use, and it may be as a result of privacy, not being able that the school focuses on, the product B student focus, where information is assessed with the student's social security and parents' specific passwords plus a user. So again, that goes back into the privacy issues that she's thinking about. If we're sharing data with agencies outside of our school district, we guaranteeing that privacy. And then another thing was teaching strategy. Strategic preschool curriculum is currently being used by Head Start in some Kentucky areas, and she suggested that websites use something that provides the benchmarks for development and allows anyone who interacts with the children as a way to upload documents. So these were just a few of the things that she mentioned that she found and was concerned about, and because of her work in juvenile justice, she knows some of the things and has seen some of them, and is considering how we make, as we're developing our systems, looking at recommendations, we need to make sure that we keep these students in mind. And I think that's pretty much all that I had to share. Andre, is there anything else that you felt like we should mention that I may have skipped over?
No, well, maybe the only more like a strategic point is that I think we really are thinking about this issue of how we make sure these populations get attended to as a cross committee, like a cool council issue. So Azadi brought this to our attention, and she has a lot of obviously deep experience. If you have not talked to her, I had the privilege of talking with her about her life story, and I was blown away by all the things that she had done from the White House to here in the state. Unbelievable. And but she brought this to our attention, so she has some passion, deep experience in this, but so do some people in other committees. And so we want to make sure that in this case, even though it started here, we build like a little micro community of people who really care about these populations, and help us sort of with the initiative overall think through that.
Exactly. And again, when you think about the populations that are mentioned, some of you may have worked with these populations in the past, or maybe doing so right now. What are other things that you're thinking about when you think about the foster child, the homeless child, the child that is in the juvenile justice system? What are, if we miss some, the ones that are homeschooled? What can we do to make sure that we're inclusive of them as we're working towards building an accountability and assessment system? Because it's going to be a challenge, but just thinking about what can we do. I think that's our reporting from what's going on inside of Kentucky. And you guys, I really appreciate all the work that you've done, because they have worked really, really hard. And Jennifer, your support that you've given us, and Andre and Susan, thank you so much, because you guys have been very, very supportive of us, and we really appreciate it a lot. And look forward to carrying this work forward. So now, Sarah, are you ready to go ahead and have your people start reporting?
I am. I was actually wondering, though, if we might want to address some of the questions in the chat just while we're still kind of on the topic of learning inside Kentucky, before we switch to the outside Kentucky pieces. So looking at the questions that we have so far, I know Susan posted one about what about CARA would be useful for us to bring into the future. What lessons learned should we take to make it more sustainable? And somebody jump in if you've got some clarification that you'd like to add in on those. My question was specific about the performance assessment that was done during CARA, because a lot of our L3 districts are moving towards some kind of performance assessment now. And so how can we take what was done during the CARA stage in Kentucky and kind of learn some lessons from that going forward? And I remember this because I was in 8th grade when we did a performance assessment in the library. So I remember it as a student, but I don't have any experience with it as an educator. And then Eddie added down as well about wanting to know more about performance assessments, the metrics used for scoring, the barriers to those. And I think that's a really key question coming in for your group, Kathy, because the performance assessment, I don't remember the task, but I remember, it was just that one time and then it never happened again. Like, I don't know if anybody ever came back. We never got the results. I don't remember being told how I did or didn't do. And that was just the end of it. And so it wasn't very meaningful, I think. And I think those are some things that might be taken into consideration there. So do anybody want to jump in and talk some more about that?
I would jump in just a little bit, and that's the key pieces that Betty and I have discussed that we've not been able to retrieve yet. So that is the imprint. Those are excellent. Thank you all. Excellent reiterations of what we still need to do, because we do want to compare those elements and try to assess them and give you all more detail. We just don't have them yet. So as soon as hopefully we can get them in the very near future and be able to do that.
Well, I don't think there'll be any doubt we'll be able to get answers to these. I mean, some of them I could say right now, but I'd rather wait until we have the interviews to get more direct. And one thing I think that's important to understand is that, Sarah, the reason you didn't receive any feedback was not a student accountability system. It was a school accountability. So it wasn't designed to give you feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It was designed to provide feedback on how well the adults were teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the reason you didn't get that. And then, so the matrix system, and there's so much that was in this system that we really need to identify to lay out for you more directly. And we can do that because it was not a simple system. It was a complicated system.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, one of the things that I would add, of course, you made me feel quite old when you said you were a student, because I was a principal in 1990.
Look,
when
I'm teaching
Sarah
with former students now. So if you're in the I'm old boat, so am I. I'm looking forward to being staff grandma pretty soon. So
but one of the observations that I made was that for the performance assessments, rather than that being an ongoing assessment that was used in classrooms, it was used as a one-time event rather than a true assessment process that could be used throughout the year. And I think there was a training issue there too, in terms of training teachers on how to do that. I think there were some implementation flaws, if you will, in terms of implementing that across the board. But the biggest issue I saw was that it wasn't used on a regular basis, where I think we understand now that performance assessments should be used on an ongoing basis with students to get some real results.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then understanding with performance assessments, one of the goals and realities is that performance assessments did impact what happened in the classroom, because teachers were teaching more using an activity, student involved performance type of structure. They could no longer teach so students could just respond on multiple choice tests or open response tests. They also had to be able to apply learning. And that was to be one of the major factors of performance assessments, and why it was, and I believe still continues to be very important, is to give students those opportunities to apply learning. So there was, and I can tell you, I can still remember some assessments too. The one that I can never forget is the duck that was dipping. Rhonda, you may remember that one, but there were lots of performance assessments. And I also remember someone else who's on the council who spoke up at our council meeting, who said that he was in high school when there were performance assessments, and he valued it so much because it was the first time he felt that his learning was really being assessed. So.
Sarah,
I have one question that I wanted to know, and Kathy, you can probably answer this, is that as we move also, besides just assessment to accountability, what data are we gathering from these L3, what the districts are doing? Are we not going to use that information? If so, who's gathering some analysis and how is it being evaluated? What's the structure that is being evaluated on? And we talked about rubrics and structures, metrics for performance assessments. How are we evaluating that information, able to use that as we discuss future?
Yes, we are. And Andre is going to share in more detail specifically what we're doing. But yes, we are looking at the initiatives and asking questions about the data and where that fits into what we're doing and how we're going to use it. Andre?
Yeah, so I was going to say that maybe one step before that. So we're not at the step where we're asking at the moment for, let's say, specific data across districts to do empirical analysis, because that would require us to have like clear research questions, clear goals, and we don't have those yet. But what we are doing, and this is correct, is that we have asked these higher level questions. And if you go, for example, on the project-based learning piece, if you go to that document where the PBL works folks are talking through what they actually are doing, you see that they will say like, yeah, we use we have certification and training programs, we have standardized tasks and rubrics that we've been using across multiple states, and we're using those processes here, and we ensure quality using our standard protocols because it's a relatively mature, robust enterprise. And I'm not saying that to make a sales pitch, I'm saying that to say, if we want to ask questions about, what the current state of that is, it's helpful to have a framework. So it might be useful to just sort of like find out from that initiative, which is already funded, about how they're going about their work, what kind of metrics they're computing, what kind of qualitative criteria they're using, what their process is. And then seeing sort of like what secondary analysis need to be even done at what points in time. And yeah, that is something that we definitely have on our horizon. And as you can imagine, we'll have to figure out just in terms of like time and resources, how we're going to manage it as a committee. And so that's something where also, if some of you have, for example, a specific interest to dig deeper into these initiatives and essentially, spend more time with them on finding out particular aspects of their work, both from like, first of all, scouring the resources that they make publicly available. You can ask people like Susan, Brian, Sandy. We can also, if you wanted to, give you some, literature-based references about both, sometimes about what is known about the initiatives generally, or also what an area of work. So there's a lot being written on some of these. And we can help you, for example, shape some guiding questions and sort of maybe talk about what the lens is that we want to use in order to look at these initiatives, so that we get the information that we want. And so we would really appreciate that if people were to raise their hand and say like, yeah, you know what, deeper learning, that's really of interest to me. I have a passion for that. I'd love to dig deeper. Let us know. And yeah, we'll work with you on that.
Okay. And I see one final comment from Laurelyn, and hers is about access needs to be examined specifically to the visually impaired population. Many platforms are not readily accessible, but the American Printing House for the Blind can help with that. But we also need to look at the students' ability to access their own portfolio. This will be complicated for students in the foster system or for students in the juvenile justice system. And I think that we have given some thought to some of those things. That's one of the things that Azurji was mentioning in her recommendations, is the ability to access their own files and know what's going on in their life. All right. Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts? Keep them coming. You can drop them in the chat. We want to hear from you, because we know we don't know everything, but we're searching for information and ideas. So great questions and great input. Thank you all so much.
I
Okay.
might say very quickly that Cheryl and Brandy, who had, don't know whether you remember this all, they had volunteered to do some digging into the L3 initiatives. So we've met once or twice, and they're in the process of actually interviewing both and talking to the people in their own districts, because we thought that might be an easy starting point for them to just work through these guiding questions about this as a use case. We have this document that you may recall, it's called a framework for use case reviews. It's a different set of guiding questions. It's also about like similar to the strategic initiatives, but not quite as tactical. It gets at these things of like, why is this a use case that you've chosen? What do we think we should learn about this from an assessment perspective, from an accountability perspective? Or were some facilitators and some barriers of this work? So that kind of framing. And they're in the middle of doing interviews, and are writing that up. We'll probably have that in the next few weeks. Then we're going to iterate a little bit more. And I mean, I can tell you already that if some of you feel like you have an interest in digging deeper on certain L3 districts from the perspective of our committee, they will not have the time simply to do that for like all the districts. They're doing some that are most promising, and I know some of you are going on school visits as well. So I think it might be really maybe when we talk about Kathy and Sarah about the school visits, I think that's a really good opportunity to sort of connect that to this sort of like framework for use case reviews, because that's like an investigative lens, like a perspective where we might want to do a little bit of like, even if there's variation, but like the rough norming of like, what do we care about from the perspective of our committee, and what can we learn from these, and how can we bring that back so that everybody can learn from that. Thank you.
Right.
Sarah, are you ready to move forward with your group?
Okay, yes, I am. And we actually don't have a lot of people here tonight or this afternoon that did some of the casework. Andre, you've talked a lot, but I'm probably going to kick it back to you, because I know you and Darlene Barnes did some discussion with her work with Shanghai. And you're on mute.
Yeah, and I have to say, just to be transparent with everybody, so Darlene had reached out to me and asked some questions. She's using that same framework for the use case reviews. And so we iterated a little bit about, and this is a challenge, right? And let's be clear. So, and I think this is an issue that we should discuss as a committee also. I feel like it's worth doing that, which is that when you're looking at another country, then there's always a lot of political, social, financial, cultural, historical factors that have sort of affected their system and their solution design, and why they even had educational reforms. And there's like work in comparative education, and there's a variety of reports written. So one of the challenges is, how do we help people not go crazy about like essentially becoming the experts on a given country? And that was a little bit that Darlene and I went back and forth to try to figure out, what's the level of detail. And I think one of the things that I would say, and I'm sharing this transparently as a mindset for all of us, I loved it when Ernie and Betty, you were talking today, when we've talked about this. It's like, it's so helpful for us as a committee to have the people who are going into to lean into being the expert in the sense, not in the scientific sense necessarily, that hasn't been your work in life, but if it has, great. And also just to have an opinion and shape. And that's, I think, what we've been trying to do with Shanghai, is to say like, so what about this is really of interest and of value for Kentucky? Because it's not about becoming experts in Shanghai, it's about saying, what are good ideas? What's the context in which these ideas were created and were implemented and evaluated? What can be learned from that? And if the answer is, it's interesting to see, but it's not really translatable and adaptable, I think the point is that that's okay. That means like it has been explored, because it's very hard to do cross-cultural translations of these, even just as we know from international studies and all of that. So, and I have not worked with anybody else, Sarah. So,
No, I know.
Have, right? I don't know whether you have by any chance. With
I just knew
anybody.
because Darlene
Yeah.
had CC'd me on the conversation that y'all were having.
That's right.
And I think when I was looking over her work, when I scroll down to the adaptability considerations, which is question number 7, about which innovation aspects are of most relevance for the future of
Right.
Kentucky, it's kind of the really key point. Like, I mean, the stuff about the history and why it works and all that is interesting, but it was more about that, you know, that students are completing their 5 years of primary and their 4 years of junior secondary education, and then can possibly continue on to their senior secondary education. And I think that relates in some ways to some of the choices that we've talked about with students after 8th grade, is looking at and have talked with, I've talked with actual students as well in my own district, and that at other student panels, is wanting the more freedom of choice to go beyond the prescripted, you have to take Algebra 1, you have to take geometry, you have to take English 1, and so on. And how can we leverage some of that information into moving into a workforce and a student body that is more personalized? So, and I know Suzanne said she was on here earlier, and she had messaged me last night about Finland. And I think, I don't know, Suzanne, I know you're driving, so I don't know if you really want to talk a lot about Finland or at this point yet. And I'll pull up that framework because I had it up a second ago. Let's see if I can find it.
And you know, one of the things, by the way, that we can think about as a committee.
Okay,
is-
can you hear me?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I had to hit like star 6. I'm like a block away from my house, so I'm actually really close. But sorry, I did a long drive. I was out of town. So I just started putting stuff in that. I apologize for being like behind on that. And honestly, I started off my research because of the conversation we had in our Beyond Kentucky small group last time, of really trying to find, we thought it would be helpful to find some examples of actual assessments of like, what does this even look like? So that's where I started, and I wasn't able to find what I was looking for. And then, to be honest, I got buried in some other work and it kind of got away from me. And then I realized, oh no, like once my power got back on, like I'm behind in preparing for this meeting. And I thought, you know what, maybe I will look at some of these other, it was helpful to see the other case studies, because what Andrea was talking about was, you know, is this even useful for us to study right now, because the situation is very different than our situation. And so that was, I've just started sort of thinking through, like, if we were to do some learning from Finland, what would be useful to know more about. And so that's, I don't have it, in about 30 seconds, I'll have it in front of me. But that was where my mind was starting to go as I was working on that report at this point. Because I don't know that we'll find a lot of examples, because it's so locally based that I don't know how I'm going to find local, like, examples of assessments without making the connection with an actual school. Some very interesting things that I learned, to me, interesting things was, one was that with the amount of local control in Finland with their assessments, that they actually have an extremely low inter-school variance on their PISA assessments. So it felt like, you know, that people would make some assumptions that if there's not as much tight control of a system, that there would be more variance, but they actually had a very low variance between schools and a really low achievement gap, which I don't know. Hold on, let me see. I'm in front of my computer now, and I can try to pull up my Apologize for this while I'm trying to find it really quick. All right, so looks like some of you are in the document. So they also have a lot of deeper evidence of deeper learning on their assessments, their international assessments. One thing that I thought was really strong is how much students are involved in the learning. And there may be some lessons to learn there as well. So I don't have answers to all the questions, but I also thought it would be really helpful to learn more about what kind of training and support the teachers have to be able to take on this work, because they did invest heavily into that as a country. So they're paid more. You know, there's some of that we don't have a lot of control over. They're paid more, they're respected more. There's a huge investment, but it does make me wonder, like, what kind of lessons we could learn from Finland. And so I'm gonna mute myself and see if I can connect on my computer on the Zoom so that I can at least like see faces and see the chats. But if you have any questions, or comments, feel free to jump in.
Okay. Susan, I thought the piece that you mentioned that in what you had researched so far was just the bit about the students being really involved and encouraged to be involved as part of the system, that they weren't just having education done to them, but that they were active participants and directed a lot of what they were doing, which I thought was an interesting piece to bring back. And then while Suzanne's logging in, I shared in the chat that Darlene was busy. She picked Shanghai and Virginia. So Kathy, I saw your question there about multicultural and socially diverse. So I would say Finland and Shanghai probably do not fit that criteria, but I think Virginia certainly does. And so she had shared in that chat about, or I'd shared the link to her document about Virginia. And again, going down to question 7, which is about which innovation aspects are of most relevance. I felt like when she was talking about this was that CTE piece, which I know a lot of our L3 work is really focusing on how can we expand our career and technical education pathways and give kids more personalized learning into learning that's relevant for them. And so Virginia credits a lot of the work that they have done well with that expansion in their CTE credential. She did, however, point out that some of the national studies found that the high school students' CTE concentrations were not necessarily well aligned to the labor market. And so that was a consideration that we may want to think about as we continue with our work with CTE in Kentucky, is if we're pulling that into our innovation system, that we're making sure our students are leaving with certifications for a career that they're interested in, but that also the career is relevant to where they want to live and that they have a future with being able to a career and being able to afford the life that they want. So, hey, Suzanne, I see you on there. I didn't know if you had anything else and then that you wanted to add. And then I'm looking at the chat for some questions. And then no, Kathy, to answer your question about historical educational inequities about South Africa and India, that was not listed as one of the educational models that we were necessarily looking at. I think that might be something that we could take into consideration. I don't know a lot about the education system in either one of those countries, so I would have to defer to somebody else that does know more than I do.
Well, I asked the question because I'm thinking what our society looks like, and educational opportunities, even though sometimes we tend to think we move beyond the past 400 years, we have not, and there are still things that are impacting students' success in school. And so what have they had in terms of educational opportunities? That's why I asked the question. And I think it does have something to say about where we are and what we may want to consider when we're considering what we're going to be doing for our students.
Agreed.
I know it's been a while since I've been to South Africa, but truly, when you look to the public school system, it's everything from a trailer with holes in the floor to something that looked like a private school. So the range of school and education is vastly, vastly, vastly diverse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else questions or comments for Work Outside Kentucky? I think a lot of people are still kind of filtering in with their reports because I don't have anything else in our Google folder to share at this point.
I'll just note, just for the Outside Kentucky group, Sandy and I were involved with writing a number of brief, literally 1 to 2 page case studies related to performance-based assessment system initiatives happening around the United States, and those are close to being published. So we'll be able to share those and add them to our repository when we're finished.
Perfect.
Thank you. Couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Thank you, Susan. Okay, then I think at this point, if nobody has any other questions in the chat, and Kathy, do you have anything else you want to add about reporting out here? Then we're ready to move on to discussion of design principles, which Susan and Andre, that's both of you all.
Okay, fabulous. Susan, I'm going to kick this off, and then you're going to lead the conversation, right? Super, awesome. Yeah, so we're going to have a conversation today about design principles with you all. So first of all, why design principles and what are design principles? We're doing this because, as you know, we are working on a report for the Cool Council, and time goes by so fast. It is only 6 weeks away from now, and the idea is to integrate some of the learnings, at least, that are taking place that you are hearing about, and synthesize them, and then ideally we would like to be in a place to make recommendations, but you can only make recommendations if you actually are well informed and you have a clear sort of like framework and idea. So one of the things that we were discussing was that rather than too early starting to pretend we want to propose a particular solution, is we need to first of all talk about the essential characteristics, the non-negotiables that we want any solution for the assessment accountability system to have. And so that's what our conversation today is going to be about. It's about thinking about what we call the design principles. There's other terms. If you go online, you know, there's a bunch of debates about what's a principle, when do I call things a principle, when do I call things a value, and people differ on this. And so let's just say this isn't about content of education. This is about non-negotiables for design solutions of the system overall, from the perspective of looking across different systems in particular. So, and maybe in some cases, I should say, maybe in some cases, you know, looking across also means that within a district, obviously, there's certain characteristics that we want these systems to have. So Susan and I did one thing, and Susan, that's my last thing, and I'm going to hand it over to you, is because I like to always share with people where information is. So let me go back here quickly. And if you go to our folder, you can see that there is a subfolder for design principles. In that folder, we put in, again, the United We Learn report and the 2-pager, just as a reminder that that is, again, the context of the vision. And then Susan and I created a short document, 2 pages. We can contain ourselves. And this is on the first page, a few frequently asked questions that we thought you might have about this. So like, what are design principles? What's the difference between a principle and a solution? Why do we need these? Are there some examples or frameworks? Does it have anything to do with like our bigger plan, our theory of action? And what are we going to do with these? And then on the second page, this is literally just a copy and paste of these 10 themes from the United We Learn report on the top, and then some selected statements that are about desires related to assessment and accountability. And so some of these, you can look at them and be like, that kind of is a design principle, right? Others are sort of like related to principles. There may be more descriptions of states or characteristics. So there's always this little bit of translation that we will have to do together to get to sort of a list and a prioritization eventually of that list of what we really feel as a committee we should put up as our like North Stars that we continually look towards, and also evaluate how we're doing our work and what our recommendations are, and then also what other people are doing with the recommendations we provide. And so Susan is now going to lead us really in a short little exercise where we're going to do some sort of structured brainstorming. I'm going to manage the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on that, and then hopefully after this we'll take this information, what we are learning, and we're again synthesizing it, sharing it back out toward you so you can reflect back on it, see whether we've captured what you're doing, so that hopefully we'll have at least some strong foundation that we can share in the report in about 6 weeks. All right, Susan, the floor is yours.
Oh, great. Thank you, Andre. And we should also have a time on when we're hoping to wrap this up. Kathy, I know you said you'd be our timekeeper today. When do we need this conversation to end to make sure that we have time for the rest of the agenda?
I'm looking at the rest of the agenda, and I don't think it's going to take much longer than 10 minutes to talk about. It's just going over surveys and some announcements. So it is
Perfect.
4:10 right now. So you've got a good bit.
All right, perfect, great. So we'll try to wrap it up by 1:15, so we have ample time. Perfect. So really, as Andre said, we want to articulate what is it that we value in whatever the future design of assessment and accountability will be in Kentucky. What are the things that we know now that we want to hold on to that will be then useful when it comes time to articulating design options or solutions, right? It's sort of like, can we hold them up against our design principles and see how we're doing and check ourselves? So based on the conversation that we had today, I drafted some examples of what these might look like. I was listening to you all as you were sharing out on the good work that you've done and thinking about, okay, so based on what you're sharing, what might be some ideas that we should be throwing around as a committee, or some commitments that we want to make to each other in coming up with potential recommendations for the future design of an accountability or assessment system. One of those might be design for sustainability, right? The components of whatever design we come up with should be flexible enough to adapt over time. I heard that from one of you today. Potentially, we want to commit to designing with the needs of our most marginalized or most vulnerable students at the center, thinking about what would best serve those students who are unhoused or who are migrants or who are in residential facilities, and then designing for the rest. Maybe we want to design, as Betty was talking a little bit about the theory of action for how Cura was intended to influence teacher practice. Maybe that's something we want to adopt in our future design, sort of design to model or support high quality instructional practice. Potentially our assessment or accountabilities would be supportive of that in some way. I heard Suzanne talking about empowering educators, thinking about lifting up our educators as professionals. Maybe we want to think about designing so that whatever system we create values the professionalism and empowers educators as active participants in the process, and having assessment and accountability being something that they do rather than assessment and accountability being done to them. Thinking about the same for students. There's a possibility when we're thinking about Finland of students as being agents in their own learning and in the assessment process. Maybe this is something we want to wrap around. Maybe we want to design to make sure whatever we're creating is valuing those skills that are most aligned to the labor market needs in Kentucky. So we're setting our students up for success. Now, this is just what I've heard so far. I don't think we can do a system that does all of these. Maybe we can't, but the idea for this discussion is to be generative and thinking about what are those things that we might want to hold ourselves to. And then maybe if we get far enough down the road, we can think about prioritization and making decisions about what's our non-negotiables and what are our nice to haves kind of thing. So our group is small enough today. We sort of planned on sort of breaking out or doing these structured chat activities. I think we can sort of open it up. We've been doing a lot of talking at each other today and not a lot of talking with each other. And so I think it might be nice for us to sort of have a discussion about what resonates with you, what design principles should we be thinking about for ourselves. And these are just examples of ideas. If we should be writing and adding our own. We can steal from those if you like any of them or they resonate with you, but I don't want to be prescriptive and tell you what they are. So I'll stop talking and open the floor to others who want to jump in.
Well, I'll jump in. I would like, and you can help word it, Susan, better than I can. The first one that you listed there is one of mine, absolutely. But I would like that when the assessment and accountability tool is completed, I want to make sure that once the system is created, there's ample time to create the accountability system before implementation.
Right. So we're not trying to build the plane while we're flying it here, because
Exactly.
that was one of the problems with Kira potentially.
Yeah.
I like that a lot because I think that we're going to be asking students and teachers to make a huge shifts, and that would build in time to intentionally support that shift before we start assessing it. Because I think that happens a lot and there's no reason to rush that, you know.
Is it possible to develop an implementation, kind of bring it out slowly, test the waters, work out the kinks before you spread it statewide? How to say that?
And when I think of sustainability, that component, I'm always thinking ahead into the future and what does it look like? How are we going to be sure that we're making sure that things are sustainable in terms of going back and bringing a committee together to look at, okay, this is where it's almost like a study and where you're looking at where we are and how well are we doing? Do we need to change some things? Do we need to implement new things? So that's what I think about when I think of sustainability, is the long-term, what's available to us, what are we going to be doing long-term to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to address all the populations, as well as provide for the things, and number one, the students as well as the teachers.
I think Kathy brings up a really good point there about sustainability. I almost think we need to backwards plan where we know where we want to be. When do we want to be there? In how many years? Like I completely agree with what you're saying, Ernie, about we need time to implement that, but we can't just keep going, well, we'll implement it in the future, because you'll never get there. So
exactly. You have to have
deadlines. When do we want to target to have this system in place? At what point? And then backwards plan the steps that it's going to take for us to get there. So in this coming school year, we're going to do this. And in the school year after that, we're going to do that, taking into consideration all those points that you've got listed there about being inclusive for everybody, designing it. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to peer at this screen. I don't know if it's possible.
No,
Susan, for you
I
to
read
zoom
them
in.
out because I didn't know if you guys wanted to adopt any.
Oh,
of
no,
them.
put
I'll
all
make
those
them
in there.
less gray
Put
so
it
you can
on,
see
yes.
them.
And can you zoom in on your actual screen so it'll be a little bit bigger than, yes, there you go. That's so much better. My eyes are old. You know, and I'm also thinking about, you know, we've got some educators that are doing amazing work, particularly the ones that are doing some of this work already in our L3 districts, that how could we empower, if we want to empower educators, then they need to be leading this professional learning.
That first point that you were
Agree.
mentioning, I was going to throw in the technical term of, you know, theory of action, right? Articulating the overall desired outcomes, the kind of mechanisms that we want, our key, what we're doing right now, key design principles and foundational assumptions and constraints, like really making sure that we know what the sort of roadmap is, and then from that derive that sort of technical plan about like when to do what. And I think the challenges I would quickly say is like, you know, in different initiatives, you know, that's already going on from their perspective, right? So the PBL works people and the DL people, they are thinking already about all of these interconnected pieces and scaling that up. So one thing we need to think about is at some point, like when we say the word assessment system, what does that call out to different people? But that's a different conversation. I'll stop there. So let's continue with the values.
So it seems like there's a few that we've dug into here. I'm wondering, are there any of these design principles that we don't care about as a committee? Maybe that's a better way to start. Are any of these, can they be deprioritized or less lower priority?
I mean, I'm thinking the only one would be number 6, because the labor market needs could change by the time we get this implemented. Like that's subject to a lot of change. The rest of them seem to be, I wouldn't feel right dumping any of those.
The only thing I was thinking about with the labor market is like, is that though where we get into some of those like portrait of a learner type skills? Like I'm not talking about like welding. I'm talking about like, you know, what are those thinking skills that we want students to have. And I think that because we're including the labor market in those conversations about the portrait of learner, that if we align this with that, and we're not just talking about content, but also competencies, then I think we are in a way including the labor market without having to get in the weeds about a specific kind of skill.
Yeah, I think that labor market needs to remain an important part of what we're doing. I just think there needs to be, it needs to be somewhat fluid and flexible in that it changes as the labor market changes, then we can adapt to that. And the only other thing I would add, I mean, I think all 6 of those design principles that you have at the beginning are important. And I think you captured very nicely the conversation that we had earlier. The only other thing I would add here is the ability for the entire assessment system and the accountability system to be very transparent in terms of what we are assessing, so that everyone involved, teachers, students, community members, parents, all understand that, and it's easy to understand moving forward.
That makes me think of something else too, Jerry, that I think part of making it easy is making it timely, because we wait so long at this point for feedback from our systems that there's such a delay, that it would be nice to have feedback that's more immediate.
You're exactly right. I mean, if we're going to expect schools and districts to act upon the results, we can't. I mean, right now they're a year behind before they ever get started. So you're exactly right. There needs to be very timely results that are provided, and that they need to be clearly associated with the work that the schools are doing for their continuous improvement efforts.
Mhm. And I may want to make a connection quickly with the statements, select statements from the Kentucky United We Learn report. So I'm pulling this one, for example, just to also encourage people to maybe look there from our, either from the United We Learn report or the two-pager that we have. So for example, there's two statements there where you all have said things like, the future system should incentivize learning experiences that foster competencies and 21st century skills as articulated in a profile of graduate. So that goes with what the conversation was just a moment ago. And also, this system should be able to support communication, connection, and collaboration around the young people's interests, strengths, needs, and feedback, rather than comparing and ranking schools. And that is also I think another variation of that same idea of like, we want timely results that we can act on, but there is not just sort of like the transactional action, right? Like we want to make decisions. It's really also about that underlying flavor of empowerment, what that information conveys, and those aspects of the implementation. So.
One thing that I was thinking about, and this kind of goes into what Jerry was saying as well, is where does the local accountability piece come into that with our local boards of education? Because, and I'm thinking back to when I saw Greenup County, who's one of our L3s, and Tracy Marisi was talking about how they decided to break from what was recognized as a pathway to provide students employability skills in their local community. And it had something to do with electrical unions, and I can't get into the details on that because that's not something that I'm super familiar with. But the key point that stuck with me was the board having the flexibility and not to be penalized for doing what was best for their community. And that was it, because the jobs that they were turning students out for, if they were union certified, were excellent jobs and high paying ones, and were providing futures for those students. But it wasn't part of the official pathway. I want to say that's, I don't know if anybody else attended that presentation at the last school council, but that's kind of the gist of it that I gathered.
I just want to jump on to what Jerry and Suzanne were talking about in terms of assessment, driving learning for students. You know, we talk about individualizing student success and individualize their learning. So our assessments should be helping to drive that learning, and we should be, the educator should be able to in real time gather that data. That's going to help support those students, but also the parents, be able to have discussions with parents about what supports those students need. And then in the broader term, how do we feed that into an assessment system or an accountability system that's transparent, that shows what the students are learning, and that it is truly an individualized learning experience for our students. And I just want to, and I know I missed it earlier, but I'm going to tag on to what Sarah said around empowering educators. You know, one of the key cornerstones of ESSA was, you know, evidence-based practices, and having educators actually do evidence-based practices within their classroom and talk about it and write about it and lift it up, and giving educators that autonomy to implement a practice in their classroom, but then to also publish the paper about it, and then teach others about those practices that they're doing in their classroom.
Yeah, that cultural change, right?
Yes.
And you know, one of the things that you've all been talking about that I think is really important for us is this notion of, you know, assessments and accountability systems aren't just artifacts. I mean, there's artifacts in them. There's an assessment as, you know, maybe a performance-based activity that gets scored, or a test that is being taken. But really, if we think about designing for these, it's about designing for the artifacts, but also the implementation, right? And on in the entire culture that we want to create of local school improvement and all of that. So so when we're all thinking about a design principle, is good to sort of differentiate. You know, some of them will feel more like they're principles for a particular tool or purpose or context, and others will be more for the entirety of the implementation process, which is really important also to call out.
We probably should be looking at a system of both formative and summative assessment.
Betty,
said
could you say
system of
that again?
formative and
I
summative.
missed
I'm
that.
sorry, I said we probably should be looking at a system of both formative and summative assessment.
Yeah, and let me address what could be the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about much, and that is, how does this coexist with or separate from or live with the federal accountability requirements? Where does that fit into the whole big picture? I mean, that's something that has to be considered and discussed. And Betty's comment about the summative assessments just made me think of that.
And I think it would be really valuable to learn about the most degrees of flexibility that different states have been able to carve out under even the current accountability system, because often this sort of Title I assessment accountability calls up the most restrictive implementations, but there's, you know, all kinds of waivers, IADAs, and other initiatives that are in place that, you know, that even nowadays, without additional policy changes existed. So this idea of learning how many degrees of freedom actually can be gotten, and then what else is needed, and to work with Lillian and then the committee, the policy committee on that, that could be really valuable.
Yeah, to echo, I'll go ahead, Jerry.
I was just going to say, Andre, that's a really good point. And I actually had one of the teams that I work with do some research on that, and I'll do a short brief in a Word document, and Sarah, I'll send that to you, and you can load that up there for folks to see that. It does describe exactly what you're talking about. The question I asked them was exactly what you proposed there, Andre, is, you know, what states are finding some way to be flexible? How have they managed this moving forward? So that may be helpful as we're thinking about that. The only other question I had is, and this is a question, not a statement or something to put down there, but does organizational effectiveness play into this as well? Because sometimes we need to look at the whole organization, that, in terms of an assessment and evaluating to see how the organization is functioning as it relates to the student progress that's taking place within the school.
And just for clarity, Jerry, you're talking about the effectiveness of the school program.
Yes.
Yeah.
We could even take that one step further. If you, in the CGSA application, there's even language in there that sort of says, based on the future-oriented design, KDE is willing to entertain ways of reorganizing or restructuring the way they work with districts in order to better support new accountability and assessment systems. That's not like written in stone, but it's exactly from that perspective of saying, and I've heard people say this, I think it's a great point, right? Like this notion of, if we envision a new world where we have different relationships between the local and the state agencies, we need different models of working also with one another across the state and local boundaries. So that's even one step further.
In terms of the comment about the innovative assessment demonstration authority that Andre mentioned, this is a flexibility available within federal ESSA law that allows states to pilot innovative assessment systems with a subset of districts, so they don't have to sort of pilot something or build something and then immediately scale it statewide, but it allows for there to be sort of 2 state assessment systems operating within a state at a given time for a certain number of years. And so a number of states have taken advantage of this flexibility. There's sort of a few different models, but I think generally there's still room within the law that hasn't been explored in terms of pushing the boundaries on what are the different ways we might imagine a state assessment. So I think while certainly we should be bringing examples from other innovative states who are innovating, I think there's also, you know, given my knowledge of that space, there's also room for us to sort of think beyond what other states are doing.
I have another elephant at some point. So building on your metaphor, Jerry, the elephant in the room. So here's another one. What does it call up for you all when you think about design principles for assessment systems and accountability systems? Where are you going with that mentally immediately? Are we going 3 to 8? Are we going pre-K, like early childhood education, K through 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 8, 9 to 11, last year of high school, post-secondary? Because I think the solutions that are being, first of all, the approaches to formative and other forms of assessment, in terms of summative, etc., are very different, obviously. And I like contrast, right? Kindergarten, K through 2 versus upper end of high school, right? Early literacy screeners, early numeracy screeners, and development of those competencies, a lot of play-based learning. You get older and it's all about like CTE, dual credit, ACT, SAT, you know. So when we think about what an assessment system is look like, and when we even draw the boundaries, this comes up all the time in our use case reviews. Like, what are we talking about? So I feel like, you know, maybe it might be helpful. We don't have to make everything about everything. That's too complex. But if there is a particular context that you all have in mind as you're articulating a particular principle, where you think that is maybe more relevant than in others, maybe say that. That would be helpful. Don't know whether maybe that resonates with some. So yeah.
So we have a number of design principles articulated here. I'll invite you to either bring forward an idea that you don't see, that you think should be on the table, whether it's a principle or not. And otherwise, maybe think about what are the highest priorities. It was hard to think about what might be the lowest priorities. Another way to put it would be, what might be the highest priorities for us when we're thinking about, and now I'm wondering if I should zoom out so we can see them all. I will also put a link to this document in the chat so you can look at it. What I don't see here is this idea of like rating and ranking schools Now, Jerry, that's one of those pesky federal requirements that we have to identify the bottom 5% of lowest performers. But that is the requirement. We just have to have a mechanism for identifying the bottom 5%. And so many states have run with this idea and sort of publicly shared rank orderings and ratings. I know in the case of the Kentucky United We Learn report, certainly Kentuckians felt like they were being ranked and compared, and that was sort of a frustration. Might we want to be thinking about designing in a way that supports collaboration among districts rather than competition? This is just an idea based on the United We Learn report, but not something that we've talked about thus far.
I just pulled that from to support you. That's that statement in that.
Oh,
report.
thank you, Andre.
Yeah.
I know you put that idea on the table. I am not seeing agreement, so we can move on from that idea.
No.
So
There was in the report. No, it was a good point. I was just like, yeah,
I
that
think it is
language
a good point. And I wish we didn't have to identify the lowest 5, because then it feels like we would have a lot more freedom to come up with. Like, is there a way for, I know that everybody, wants something easy and they like the color coding and the dashboards and whatever, but that's rankings. And it's different kind of rankings, but is there a way to make it much more of a asset model where we're pulling out what the strengths are of each system and maybe recommendations for next steps for each system, which would be, everybody could have recommendations for next steps, I would imagine, as a school or a district. And so, I don't know how other people feel about language, something like that, but if it's said in a really non-educator friendly way, then that could be helpful for parents that are wanting to know a little bit more about a system. Like, that would tell me more than an orange. It would tell me that this is a district that the students feel particularly valued, or like this is a system, because there could be rating scales from students or something, like that. So what is it that the students are telling us about the system? What are the teachers saying about the system? What are the strengths of this place? Just throwing out an idea.
Well, you've raised a good point, and I think that gets back to what many of the L3s are doing right now, is that they are looking at very specifically, what does my community want to know about my schools? And that's what they're trying to assess. And it's a wide range of things, but they're giving the community the information that they're telling the school district, this is what we want to know about you in terms of assessing how well you're doing.
Yeah, and I put a link in here from a resource that Susan and Sandy had identified that I think really exemplifies this really well. It's in a different state, but it's sort of this visualization of more of this dashboard kind of approach of communicating sort of what the context and the situation is in a given school or even the state is. So there you go. This is for a district.
Yeah, that's another project that Sandy and I support. And what's nice about that dashboard is that it doesn't offer a way for folks to like somehow artificially combine across indicators to come up with a total score that would allow for that rank ordering. And so, you're not combining things like how valued or safe students feel at school with things like academic achievement and sort of coming up with an artificial conglomeration. So I think that dashboard, Andre, thanks for pulling that up, kind of speaks to this idea of, yeah, there's all these things that we care about in a school, and let's look at them individually and see where the strengths are and where the areas of need are. It's sort of like is a more genuine effort at looking at school quality holistically rather than rank ordering.
And there's also that distinction between what you do internally in the agency, where people crunch numbers, and what you publicly share. That's an important distinction, right? So you can rank order internally because you have to comply federally, but that may not be the signaling and the communication and the rollout that you're doing, right? Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about next steps, and then I'll turn it back to our chairs to, because I know we have a few agenda items. And so what we'll do is we'll sort of take these ideas and see if we can't process them in a way that holds true to the intention behind these design principles, but make sure they're written in a format that's coherent and makes sense, and they're ordered, and then send them back to you to review and comment on. And ultimately, maybe at the Cool Council meeting, we'll have time to sort of discuss them further, potentially even vote to adopt them, something like that. We will include the next iteration, the next draft, in our progress report. We have a progress report due before the April Cool Council meeting, so we'll make sure that the draft is in there, but we'll be very clear that they're sort of draft design principles at this point in time, and then make sure we carve out meeting time in April to discuss. Are there any questions about next steps or suggestions? Thank you very much. This has been very generative and productive, inspiring, really.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes and we've just got a few things to cover. One of those is a survey that's being put forth by the broader United We Learn Council, and that is about the habits of the Kentucky United Learn Council. So I've got a little bit of information to share about that, if I can get my computer to cooperate. So taking a look here at the habits of the Cool Council, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So it's just kind of focusing on at this point about, as we're considering all this work from the different standing committees, from the individuals that are doing all the research, we want to make sure that we're all in agreement about the habits that we are keeping in mind as we go forth in this work and as we research. And so that is making sure that we're considering diversity, that we're bringing in those diverse voices and building a sense of belonging, that we're practicing all of our work with empathy, from understanding the views, feelings, and needs of others, that this is a co-created work, that it's not just one person, it's not just the partners that we're working with the Lions Assessment Center, although I completely value all the work that they are doing, because it's been beyond helpful, but that we're working together to create and implement a solution to a challenge, and that there's reciprocity, that we're exchanging and sharing our ideas and our thoughts for the power and privileges for mutual benefit. So as we do that, and how we're doing that across the broader Cool Council is here. So thinking about the Standing Committee Learning Agenda and including L3 in our insights, we're practicing empathy by coming together to empathize with experiences across L3s by highlighting quotes that resonated. We're practicing co-creation by working together to write the key themes that we wanted to share, and that we checked back with attendees to make sure they agreed on that set of final key themes. And so what the broader council is wanting us to look at, and I'm going to see if I can stop screen sharing, is the survey that I'm going to be linking down here in the chat. And that is just gathering data about, I'm making sure I'm linked to the right thing as well. Yes, I did. Gathering data about the habits and how that functions within each one of the standing committees. And Jennifer, correct me, were they wanting this survey, was it going to close on Friday? Is that the 10th? Is that correct?
If we have time to do it now, it might be useful for folks.
Right. And
I think it would be great.
I mean, it's not a very lengthy survey.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward. So I think I'll just go ahead and leave off with announcements then as well. And I've got some other things, and I'll be pulling those up while you all can go ahead and get going on that survey. So, because it'll take me a second to find the links.
May I make a quick point, Sarah? So the
Yes,
point
go
on
ahead.
the habit. So one of the things that we've been discussing is that really this idea of monitoring how well we're all doing with these habits is sort of an ongoing practice, and it changes really situationally. I think that's something where I feel like we all have to sort of like learn to think about what it means to live out these habits in different situations. So there's a meeting like this, that's one piece. But that's very different from a small team collaborating on a particular use case or a particular effort, right? That's very different from us all coming together to write a report, for example, or attend the Cool Council meeting and share our learning. So I think one of the goals of all of this is not just sort of to do it, tap us all on the back and say to some funder, like, look how amazing we all are. It's really also of helping us learn, think, and reflect and share that openly. Like if you ever feel like there's some violations of some of these, well, it sounds so strong, but there's some ways in which we could be better at living out these values in certain processes. I think everybody really would like, well, we would like to hear that, because everybody is trying very hard to do our best, right? We all to do that. So I just wanted to mention that.
Correct. Thank you, Andre. Questions on committee survey? Just wanted to make sure everybody had that. And then I can send that out to the broader, because I know we've got several members that are not here today. So I'll craft an email real quick. I can just do it to send out to the committee as a whole, because I'd like to share that data with them about the other two things on our agenda, which are just some housekeeping announcements. So right now, Audrey Gilbert is serving as the interim chair for the larger Cool Council, and we are taking nominations at this point. And that's, I knew I'd seen March 10th. It's on this survey that the nomination form has the deadline of March 10th. So the first document that I'm sharing for you is detailing out how the nominees will be taken and kind of what the responsibilities of that will be. If you want to take a look at that document, just kind of going through the responsibilities of the chair and the vice chair, and then the nomination process. And then I'm also going to link, and I'm going to send all these out. So if you don't catch them all in the chat, don't worry about that, because I will send them out, all the links out in an email, so you can take some time to look at them later. But I'm also going to be linking in the nomination form for chair and vice chair. And so that does have a deadline, because they are closing those at 4 p.m. I'm assuming Eastern time, and not, because you fast time people tend to forget about us that are slow over here and don't identify which time zone we're in. But I'm assuming that's 4 p.m. Eastern time that will close on this Friday, March the 10th. So let me link that form in here. Right there. And then, yes, that's Andre, I will add those to the Cool Council folder, and then just give everybody direct links to those, because I've got those pulled up.
And Sarah, you may not be watching chat, but Susan Strange has said that they're going to extend that deadline to Monday afternoon.
Okay,
so
perfect. No, I did not see that. Thank you, Jennifer. And that is for the nomination form, I'm assuming, correct? Okay, I didn't see any deadline on that habit survey, so I kind of think that one's more open-ended. They're just gathering information, and there's not a deadline for that. But I'll put all of those into our shared drive, and then send out the links directly on an email here in a little bit. I have class in about 10 minutes, so it might not be till later this evening.
Sarah, I hate to interrupt you, and forgive me if you already said this, but I just want to highlight that self-nominations are more than welcome. So don't feel like you have to nominate someone else. If you're interested, please do go ahead and nominate yourself. Wouldn't it be fantastic if our Cool Council chair was a representative from our committee? We would all feel great about that, I think. So just encouraging you all, if you're energized by this work and you want to volunteer, nominate yourself. Don't feel like somebody else has to do it.
Yes, completely agree. Anything else that anybody has questions over? I'm looking at the chat here. I'm not seeing anything else popping in. Anything else that I'm forgetting to mention? Jennifer, Susan, Kathy?
the learning opportunities.
Oh, yes, sorry. Kathy, I'm gonna have you talk about that because you were in that meeting with me as well. So we are doing some school visits to some of our L3 schools. And we've got some learning opportunities coming up. Kathy, can you talk a little bit about that while I dig that out? I thought I had it pulled up, but I don't.
Yes, I can. I don't have confirmation of the dates of the visits. Here are some dates that have been thrown out. One of the dates that was thrown out was March the 23rd and March the 28th, I think. And I'm trying to still get confirmation of what's going to be going on. One of them will be in Henry County. And it's a half day. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon. I'm kind of leaning towards it's going to be a morning meeting, but I'm not for sure. And I don't know for sure where the other one is going to be, but
I found it. It was Marshall County was a possibility, and then Eminence was a possibility.
Right, exactly.
And Kathy, we were able to confirm just earlier today the information around that. So I apologize. I've put the link here in the chat for everyone. The two opportunities for you to sign up is one is March 23rd at Benton Elementary School in Marshall County. And the other one is March 28th at Eminence Independent Schools. The link has the sign up sheet has the pertinent information about the timeframes as well as the locations. So if you are interested in attending either of those, you can please fill out the information at the link for the site visits. I will say also that there will be reimbursements for mileage and things of that nature. So please fill that out. And if you're interested, so it's on a first come, first served basis. So if you're interested in going, please put your name down because others may be interested as well. And there's a limited number of people that each of the schools can host. So there's just a limited number. So please fill that out if you're interested in going there. And as we've mentioned, that'll be an opportunity for you to ask specific questions that are particular to our committee.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right. Well, like I said, I'll send out an email probably tomorrow morning that's just detailing out all these links, particularly to make sure that we are catching everybody that's on this committee, so everybody has this information and has the links for both the habit survey and the United We Learn chair, and then the site visit sign up. So thank you so much for participating today. Greatly valued everything that everybody had to contribute. Anything else, Kathy, that you want to add before we sign off here?
Look in the chat. I wrote a message to everyone.
I'm not seeing anything, Kathy.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Okay.
Andre, you can see it?
I think you might have.
What?
I can't see anything. Did you message Andre directly?
No, I messaged everyone. I was
I
just wishing a happy birthday to
today. It's Susan's
I was wishing a happy birthday to
Oh,
Susan.
happy birthday.
And I can't sing,
Thank
but
you.
otherwise it would have.
Thank you. I've had it's been a wonderful day, but it's been a long day. I'm looking forward to dinner out tonight.
Yeah.
So.
There you go. Happy birthday. All right. Well, you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing everybody in person next month.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.